For the first time, my adopted daughter reached for my hand. I'm a former Marine with a shaved head and a scar running from my left eyebrow down to my cheekbone. My younger daughter wouldn't look at me for the first 4 months after we brought her home. The social worker had warned us during the placement meeting that her biological father was the reason she'd been removed at age 5. She associates men with danger, she'd told my wife quietly while I stood in the hallway, especially ones who look intimidating. She was 8 now, and had spent 3 years in emergency placements before us. My wife became her safe person almost immediately. They'd braid each other's hair, watch movies under blankets, have whispered conversations I wasn't invited to. I understood. I didn't push. But every time I walked into a room and watched her whole body go rigid, something in me broke a little more. Then my wife's mother had a stroke, and she had to fly to Ohio. At least 2 weeks, maybe longer. The night before she left, I found her crying in our bathroom. "She's not ready," my wife kept saying. "She's not ready to be alone with you yet." I told her we'd figure it out. I wasn't sure I believed myself. The first 3 days were survival mode. She'd eat the meals I made, but take her plate to her room. She'd answer my questions with nods or head shakes instead of words. At night, I'd hear her on the phone with my wife for an hour, sometimes crying. I started leaving my bedroom door open so she'd know she could find me if she needed anything. She never did. Day 4, a massive thunderstorm hit at 2 a.m. The power went out and I heard her scream from down the hall. I was at her door in seconds, but I stopped myself from going in. She was under the covers, sobbing, calling for my wife, who was 1,000 miles away. I knocked softly on the doorframe. "Hey, it's just me, just the storm. You're safe in here." No answer. The crying got louder. Lightning flashed, and I saw her curled into the smallest ball a human body could make. Every instinct told me to scoop her up, but I knew if I touched her without permission, I'd destroy whatever tiny amount of trust we'd built. So I sat down in her doorway, not inside her room, just at the edge, and I started talking. I told her about the worst storm I'd ever been through during my second deployment overseas, how I was 23 and more scared than I'd ever admit out loud, and how my buddy Cortez sat next to me all night telling the dumbest jokes imaginable until sunrise. I told her about my scar, how I'd actually gotten it falling off a rope swing into a creek when I was 10, not in combat like everyone assumed. I told her my mother used to sing "You Are My Sunshine" during thunderstorms, and how I still thought about her every time the sky turned dark. I talked for maybe 20 minutes. Somewhere in the middle, the sobbing stopped. I figured she'd finally fallen asleep. Then I heard her feet hit the floor. I didn't move, didn't look, just kept talking, quieter now, about how my wife and I had wanted kids for 8 years before we found her, how the day we met her, I drove home and sat in the driveway for an hour because I already loved her and was terrified she'd never feel safe with me. That's when I felt it, her small hand slipping into mine. She didn't say anything, didn't look at me, just sat down next to me in that doorway, her shoulder barely grazing my arm, her tiny fingers wrapped tight around my palm. We stayed like that through the rest of the storm. Eventually, her head dropped against my shoulder and her breathing slowed. I didn't move for 3 hours. My back was on fire and my legs went completely numb. I didn't care. When my wife called the next morning, I told her what happened. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she whispered, "She chose you." That afternoon, my daughter sat at the kitchen table while I made grilled cheese. Halfway through her sandwich, she looked up and asked, "Can you tell me more about the rope swing?" 11 words, the most she'd ever said to me at once. That night, she asked to call my wife together instead of alone. When the phone connected, she said, "Daddy told me about Cortez. Can he tell you the story too?" First time she'd ever called me that.